We're on a traditional and unceded territory of Haida Nation. This village was called 𝐒𝐻𝐾𝐿. And today we have 𝗀𝗁𝗏 on the channel with us. Hi 𝗀𝗁, how are you doing?
Great.
Pleasure to meet you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, my English name is 𝗀𝗁𝗏. I was born on Haida Gwaii. My Haida name is 𝗀𝗏𝗽𝗏, which means true voice.
True voice. That's beautiful.
So I was born and raised here on Haida Gwaii. I grew up in 𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗏. Back then it was called Haida Village, and it's in the northern part of Haida Gwaii. Very beautiful, looking over 𝗏𝗏𝗏 Sound here, close to the clam beaches. So I grew up as a village kid, really, with the natural seasons. Throughout the year, we have a lot of resources we depend on, such as the berries and the different types of salmon. Back in the late 60s or so, I remember the first totem pole being raised right near my house where I grew up. It was carved by Robert Davidson and his brother Reg. I think that signaled a rebirth of our arts and culture. So I got to see Haida singing and dancing, and my father participated with that, and he started to carve in argillite, then copper, and then silver, and then gold. And as he moved through those materials, myself and my brothers, we picked up his old tools, and he would let us
play around.
Yeah, with carving argillite and copper.
Okay. Was art part of Haida culture to begin with?
Of course, it goes back generations to our great-great-grandfather, 𝗀𝗁𝗏𝗀𝗏𝗃. He was a master artist in his own time, and his work's in many museums around the world. Him and his wife, Isabel, they created spruce root hats and with beautiful paintings that Charles did on them.
Okay.
And also he specialized in argillite carving, which is a stone found here on Haida Gwaii.
It's all mostly black, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
And also jewelry, silver and gold bracelets, and canes. Presents are for formal type of canes.
Okay.
So out of ivory, silver, and abalone inlay, abalone shell inlay. But all of those treasures were gone. They were gone during my time. They were all sold off to different museums.
Okay.
They were sold off at a pittance, really. A lot of the really ceremonial pieces were just taken too from burials and caves. So there was very little of our cultural heritage left here. Like I said, back in 1969, that signaled a revival. And so the songs and the dances were being revived, the mask carving. We didn't have much really till there was maybe one or so wood carver in the village. Reg Davidson, he continued after the pole, he continued working on masks. Most of them, of course, they were being sold to make a livelihood. And that's what I did with myself too, is I carved argillite and sold it all. It was my livelihood as an artisan.
Right.
And my father also as well, selling his jewelry to people that would move to our town. It became amongst our own people too. It became a statement to wear a silver bracelet with your crest on.
Right.
Because back in the day when the missionaries came, they basically outlawed our traditional form of wearing the crest, which would be the tattoos. We used to have tattoos, would have the crest on.
And would that be part of the potlatch band?
Leading up to the house building, sometimes young men would be, and women, they would be tattooed. So, they'd be youth, really, when they get their first tattoos, piercings. And so that would show their status in the community.
Right.
And but it was acceptable to wear a bracelet with a design on it. So even back when the revival was happening in the 70s, and then became more acceptable and more people were proud of it, going up their arms, ring medallions and earrings. And so they're very proud of their crests that they could wear. Each family lineage has a different line of crests. Some are very similar. So on the raven side, you have the grizzly bear, the killer whale, the shark, in some cases, the dogfish shark. And then on the eagle side, you have eagle, you have the beaver, frog, and sculpin, and other crests. So each family has a different set.
Right. And those would be the two big clans.
Yeah, the two different moieties, yes. The two different sides, they call it. So they're very, very proud of wearing their crests. And over the last maybe 35 years or more, like we've incorporated that in with the graduation, the children graduating from, elementary school or grade 12, or even post-secondary. Their families will, during graduation day, they will present them with their robe, sometimes a tunic or a vest. And so that would be designed by members of their family. And so they would be able to wear their crest proudly on a robe. And often they're given a traditional name at that time.
Right.
And sometimes, a beautiful woven headband or a hat. So, back in the day, there's very few of those objects left in the households. The robes were just being revived.
So how has that revival history or experience during your upbringing influence you nowadays?
It's been a really long, slow climb, very much like our people making our claim of title for reinstating our title, Haida Gwaii, really. It's been a long, slow climb, moving ahead steadfastly. And that's the same thing with our art. So back at that time, in the 60s or so, or, even 70s, and, all the way through to the, back in history. After the missionaries came here, then it became like a folk art. It was thought of as a folk art. It's very demeaned, kept at a low level, low standard. We actually call those the Dark Ages by the 70s, the 80s. We have more and more artists, 90s, 2000s. We have more and more younger artists, both male and female, that have really taken the art form steps forward. And I'm glad I was a part of it, really, too.
You being the head carver, the head of this beautiful longhouse here, how do you recruit the young generation to become your apprentices?
All the way through, the first ones were basically, they were related to me in some way or the other. One of them was my son. Okay. And then the other ones were his cousins. Yeah. So it was very similar to how it's done traditionally. Young men these ones are older. They were all 18, 19 years old or so. But in the days back, the young men would migrate from their village at the age 12. They would migrate from their village to their uncle's village, and so that was a tradition that had been lost, really. And so they would leave their mothers, they would leave their fathers, and they would go to their uncle's village. So their mother's brother's village. She would call her brothers. It could be her first cousin, second cousin, but they're the same clan, so they call each other the brothers.
And this is like a custom from a matriarchal society.
Yeah, and then in return, they would get beef, and his brothers, that other village, the first village we talked about, their sons are going out, they would get nephews back into their village. Well, so they wouldn't be doted on by their mothers for too long, and they wouldn't be babied by their fathers too long, really. So it's our uncle's responsibility to raise them to be confident and strong and knowledgeable in many different ways, such as house building, canoe building, fishing, hunting, craftsmanship, artisanship. But in the case of a girl, usually she would stay in her father's village with her mother, and her mother would be the one who guided her to become a food preparer or a weaver, and to be historians, really, too. Right. Historians, to knowledge keepers. So the traditional knowledge was always kept, and they would hold the names too, also the names that would be passed down through the generations.
So, for example, what kind of names would be passed down from the previous generation?
Each family would have a list of names. They could be 50 names or 100 names.
Really? Can you give us one example?
My grandfather, back in 1935, when he became acknowledged as being the chief, and this was during the potlatch ban and stuff, and then him and his cousin were both acknowledged as being chiefs. Their two uncles. His anglicized name was George Kauho, and then who my grandfather received his name from. And the other one was Henry 𝗿𝗏𝗀. His cousin Ernie 𝐿𝗏𝗽𝗍 received the name. So they received these names. I think Ernie had the names 𝐺𝑛𝑎𝑢𝑛, 𝐺𝑠AWAK, and 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐺. And then my grandfather, he had the names 𝐒𝐿𝐻𝐾𝐿, 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐬𝐫𝐻. So they carried those names throughout their lives. Some of them they might have gotten earlier on, and then once they, throughout their life, they could bestow those names upon somebody else.
And that's the name will be passed on to the next generation.
Yeah.
Carry the legacy. What sort of challenges you faced while you're trying to reestablish this historical significance?
This is bringing me back a few years. It's over 25 years or more. I applied for the timbers for this in 1995. And that was right after I carved a totem pole for my father. For his potlatch. He hadn't really told me about the process. He went through to get several logs to carve the canoes, and so I had to go through the process. I had to find my way through the process. So I wrote letters to Macmillan Bloedel, to the Ministry of Forests, the local island, to 𝐴𝐿 Village Council, and to Council of Haida Nation, for support for my project. I did my own drawings. I had heard about my father. He often told me about how they had design things. They had designed houses, they had designed boats. And so I said, well, I could do it. And so, I just looked at old photographs of Haida houses that were taken 100 or so years ago. And I just looked at that, figured out the incline of the roofs and the height of the building. And so I just calculated it really. How do I figure out how large trees I need for this project?
Yeah.
So I had to figure it out right from scratch, really. And I wanted to do it on my own, really. I didn't want to hire an architect. I didn't want to do a feasibility study because I had seen, even in my short period of time with other things happening in our community where feasibility study, just money getting poured into that.
And nothing actually.
And nothing actually ever happening. And so I just decided to go on my own.
What motivated you to even wanting to create a house? Or was this a long
Well, I was inspired. My father inspired me, really. I'll tell you the truth, though. Is when I was growing up, probably after I started making my own livelihood, which was at a very young age, I started bringing in my own income by about 15 years of age. I was carving on many different types of materials. I was carving on whale teeth, like sperm whale teeth. I was carving on silver coins and just all the argillite. I was going to get my own argillite and carving sculptures and boxes and medallions. At first I was selling my medallions for $25, and then the next year I was selling for $35, and then $45. And then I was doing like 5 of these in one night.
Yeah.
And then, so I'd be able to make, I'd sell them to the tourists and to local or people that had come in with the Department of National Defense.
Wow.
And to teachers and I would hop on a plane and fly to Prince Rupert.
Yeah.
I wouldn't tell my parents. I like to have money in my pocket. And I would also give back to my parents, really, through my mother, give her money every month, really. Even though I wasn't even living with my parents anymore by then. I was living with my grandfather. And he was like my uncle. Like I said, when a young man becomes a teenager, and they would be raised by someone other than his parents. And so I stayed with my grandfather. And once my parents moved out to their new house, basically my grandfather says, okay, you have half the bills now.
Reality kicks in.
And so I had to pay half our oil bill, half our garbage bill, and all the different electricity, grocery bill. Yeah. And so even after that, I was still able to contribute to my mother and father and my siblings to help them, because we weren't brought up very wealthy at all. I grew up wearing secondhand clothes and shoes and handmade clothes. We ate a lot of food from the land, and we grew our own vegetables. So I grew up breaking the sod, really, with planting the vegetables every spring. And then my grandfather would take us fishing we would get sometimes hundreds of salmon. But it was always in his mind to build a house like this. And so that's why I applied right away after we did this totem pole. And then so I had to go through a process. It took 2 years to be approved. I contacted the Ministry of Forests and then applied for, I said I need 16 cedar trees to build this traditional Haida house, and together my diagrams and measurements. And after 2 years I was approved, after I'd almost given up on it, really. And they had called me and said, oh, you've been approved. So I arranged for a meeting with the liaison with the Ministry of Forests. This is where I want to go, because this is where my father told me to go look. But he had just passed away 2 months before that, about 6 months. But I remember him telling me where to go, so I went there, and then I looked through the forest. But when we're driving along, the liaison, he's pointing at all these trees that were basically dead standing trees. They were garbage trees. Oh yeah, maybe those would be good. But as soon as I said, well, I'm going to pick some out in this area, and then he had to go back to his office. And so I went through the forest and I picked out all the best trees I could find. I talked with the forest company also, 𝗿𝗲𝗽𝗀𝗽𝗃, and they provided me with a couple of fallers. One of who was Haida, and then another one is a good friend also. He became a good friend. And then what I did was I contacted the highway logging trucks, basically. So they're truckers that are able to go onto the highways. The other option was to get them delivered to the sort, really, which is because they have these heavy-duty logging trucks, and they could deliver them to the sort. But I would need to take them from there to here.
Right.
So I thought it would be better to just load them up once onto a truck and come here directly. And so that was a good call that I made. It cost more money, of course, but probably 4 times as much nowadays. But at that time, it was reasonable. And so within a week, I had all these logs here. And then, so that would be around maybe the first week of November. And so I had all these logs just piled up here. And I had a dream that night that I was in the kitchen, my parents' kitchen there, looking out the window. My father was looking over my shoulder, and it was just a proud feeling that
finally
starting. Yeah. And so it was just the opportunities. A friend of mine contacted me and said, "There's an opportunity locally. We're looking for somebody to train some out-of-work people, to give them something to do for the winter and spring." So, well, I got a project, and so what I did was, basically I taught them what my father had taught me, which was to use a mill, like a hand mill, to mill all these beams to shape. So I had to teach them how to sharpen the chainsaws and to adjust the heights on the guides and to set up the cut really too. And each of these beams took about a week or more to process them. And because they're so heavy, you got to jack them up to roll them over. Yeah. So over the next 4 months, that's all we did was we through the winter and we worked on that and getting them all shaped out. But then after that, I came to the summertime and I basically said, now what? We kept it going for a little while, and then that's when I said, well, I'll teach the young people to carve. I start to apply for different places for arts funding. Right. The Gwaii Trust was an arts program. Of course, the Gwaii Trust was the Gwaii Trust account, and then it was developed into the society. They started off with something like 20 million or so. Yeah. When South Moresby Forestry Replacement Account.
Yeah, it was federal funding that was assisting the Haida as well as the logging companies so that they could stop the logging in Haida.
Yeah, because they considered the logging companies considered it their birthright, I guess, to log these islands.
Right.
So it's kind of, I never got anything out of that I didn't work for. But
yeah, speaking of money, because from sourcing the log to carrying the log to here and then having people to build the house, everything costs money. Where did you get the funding from?
The training of the young guys. And I would get maybe between $10,000 and $15,000 a year to train them for maybe 3 or 4 months out of the year. Right. And so my first 4 apprentices I had for 4 years. And so by then I had it kind of figured out. My brothers and I, other relatives, we made a society. We made our own nonprofit society. My uncle, 𝐒𝐮𝐲 Willis White came and visited us, and I said, well, we had this ancestors, all these different ancestors, and so I want to come up with a name. And I said, well, I kind of like this one here, but I think I want it a little bit different. It was called Canoe House, but I said I didn't want it to be, I want to name my longhouse, my future longhouse. So he said, 𝗀𝗏𝗽𝗍 Canoe People's House. So it's very similar to our ancestors, a branch of our ancestors.
Is that how you came up with the longhouse name?
Yeah.
Okay.
At that time, and then we established the society with the BC registers. So that made it a little bit easier, and then to apply, as a society rather than and so I kept working on it, and then it was even right up until the last minute. I was applying for other lands too to put the building up on, and but then there was a change of local council. Okay. Old Massey Council, and then so I said, well, if they're not going to give me that plot for a lot of land there out at Newtown, I'll take this one. Well, it's built right here. This is where Dad wanted it anyway, so
right.
So I just squeezed it in between my brother's houses here. And then, of course, I was looking for funding, and I seen a program from Western Economic Diversification. It was up to $150,000. It was called it's called 𝗁𝗍𝐾𝐿. There's all these acronyms. It was like Softwood Industries Community Economic Adjustment Initiative. And so I found that I could get up to $150,000 grant towards my building. So I was approved for it, but I had to find matching funding. And I had about $60,000 in savings. And so I got one of my friends to calculate the value of all the beams. And so it turned out all the beams and all the wood I had the added value of $90,000. So I had exactly $150,000 for the matching funding.
Okay.
When it came, it was early springtime of 2004. I had been approved for the grant, and then I designed the foundation of the building, and I got a structural engineer to look at it, and he said it was over 30% overbuilt, which is a good thing. So I put the foundation in, and I was working, trimming up the beams, getting everything all ready. The money wasn't coming in yet. They're holding up all the money for I don't know why, they were just holding it back for a was being managed through our community futures, and so they held it back. And so I was using my own savings throughout that time. A lot of the building foundation, almost right up to the time we raised the first beams into place. We had everything ready, and I called the community to come in. So there was about 30 or more strong men that showed up, and 100 strong children, and many of the elders in the village came. And I remember Chief 𝗁𝗁𝗃𝐽 was over here with my uncle Willis, watching from the back steps there, and while we're raising the beams up. And the way the funding came in very incrementally, it was every penny. I had to.
It's basically in and out.
Yeah. It was very difficult, but I managed to do it. I pulled it off very well.
Tell us a little bit more, because it sounds like the community is very supportive of this project, and it's also a dream of yours. But were you raising a family at that time?
Oh yeah, yes.
How was your partner or your family feel when you're using up your own saving to complete this project? Or not even complete it?
Well, my wife has, she often repeats what her mother had said to her: you can't take it with you. When you die, you can't really take your money with you. So enjoy it while you're alive.
And she's like, Christian, just go for it.
Yeah. I said, well, nothing's impossible. You just start to make your goals. No matter how big they may seem, you can get to it. If you just might be a step by step to get there. Just got to keep moving forward on your goals, and that's what I did. And I look for opportunity. It has to be a little bit of opportunity in there. One of my friends, he said, a challenge is an opportunity. It says exactly what I had in my mind, really, is if it's a challenge, it's an opportunity to bring yourself further ahead. But, a lot of people, they think about the stumbling blocks. Those stumbling blocks, you can jump over it, you can go around it. It's an excuse. If you can't find a way to get around it or to get over it, just remove that stumbling block. Get the right tools so you can remove it. And then, the right tools could be through knowledge, education, or through hard work. We could move mountains with the work of many hands. And I wanted to prove that it could be done without government so much. I did get that small grant, but it was a very small one considering how much I put into it, which is years. Yeah. Just for things like flooring and furniture and things that were needed to make it operable. I wanted to be a living place too, a living where people are growing and learning, practicing the culture, through our learning of the songs, creating dances, choreography, and of course, we carve these masks, but then we bring them to life. We bring them to life through our songs, our stories. I would advise them to continue on with their education, but also learn about their culture. There could be bad influences in life too. Drugs and alcohol are not very healthy for the body, mind, or the spirit. So I advise them to just go with things that make you feel good, really, but in a good way. I can't see why anybody could be bored. There's just so much to do in the world, so many interesting things in life and nature. That's where I'm inspired, is walking through the forest almost on a daily basis, or on the beach. It's just so amazing, inspiring to hear the birds singing, and the wind, the waves, and just to see life transform before your eyes, through the seasons. So drugs and alcohol are a plague on our communities, but I think as artists, we have the voice to expose those different things that we can, where we can make changes in our lives and in the way we treat our environment. In our history, we think about, we don't only think about the spirit above, or we don't even have a devil. But we have another being, really, which we don't go there though, but we call him the noble one, standing and moving. When he gets up to move, that's when we have an earthquake. So that's a being that every few years he'll shift his position. And then that's actually on a totem pole up by the hospital. It's the bottom figure on there represents, like all these, all our stories connect us with the land. They connect us to different parts of the land, the names of all the different areas. So like I could think of any different part of our land around the islands. I could think of stories that go along with that, and the different lineages that live there. So we've had spiritual experiences being in these areas, almost like somebody's been there, or somebody was there. Their spirits are there, very strong presence. So, but my father, he always said to me, and when we heard drumming in the middle of the night when we're carving together, and we heard drumming, I was a teenager, and I could hear this drumming and singing. And he put his head up to it and he could hear it. We walked to the back door and we stepped out onto the veranda there. And then we listened. We could hear the drumming, singing. And slowly it faded. Then we could hear these waves coming in on the North Beach. And walked back in and sat down and continued carving. And a while later, then we could hear it again. And he said, "Don't worry, son. It's our ancestors. They're on our side."